So I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like there's a sentiment going on in board game communities that randomness is just bad. There's no two ways about it. It's just something that's bad. Stay away from it. No randomness in my skill-intensive board games. Okay, but seriously, I got a question for all you watching this. How did we get here? Why is randomness such a hated tool of board games? Because it's something that I see used quite frequently across gaming in general. So I decided that, hey, you know what? Let's take a look at Mark Brown's Game Maker's Toolkit and his little video talking about randomness in video game design. Let's see what he has to say about all this stuff. I'm going to be going ahead, reacting to this, making some points, comments, analysis, all that good stuff. But also because I like to respect fair use and all that, I would highly suggest that you actually go and watch his video first. I will put a link down in the description below, because this reaction video is definitely not going to cover the entire thing in its whole and just have me talk over it. Nope, I'm going to be reacting and cutting things around as I see fit, because I want you guys to go and watch Mark Brown's videos. He is an amazing content creator, makes some of the best video game analysis stuff out there. So yeah, without further ado, let's take a look.
Video games are full of randomness. There are roguelikes with procedurally generated level layouts, role-playing games with random encounters, strategy games with unlucky misses, and games that play with cards, dice, roulette wheels, and random number generators, or RNG. While randomness is responsible for some truly wonderful moments in gaming, it can also be a cruel mistress that leads to unfair outcomes and frustrating failures.
And that's a key thing I do definitely want to touch upon, and why people probably do not like randomness, is that it can cause you to lose control of what you're intending to actually do, which is a pretty big deal for strategy, making plays, doing the things that make you feel smart, and then suddenly it all goes haywire because some randomness got in your way. I've also always kind of wondered, where did the term RNG even come from? Is it a video game term? Is it just like a computer science term? Is it a math term? I don't know, but I feel like I only ever really have heard the term in video games, not so much in board games. I'm not sure why that is. Maybe I'm just looking in the wrong areas, who knows?
So what gives? Why does this single game design tool lead to such radically different reactions? The truth is, some game designers actually split randomness into two distinctly different concepts, and recognizing these differences can be the secret to wrangling RNG and making luck more fun.
This is something I definitely do want to touch on, because despite what Mark is saying here about what reactions people have to randomness, at least in my experience, it feels like I've seen a lot of chatter on the internet about people just straight up just saying randomness bad, like in general, just as a catch-all. They're not saying, oh, I hate this game's randomness, I don't like this way this is being done here. It's more just like, I just don't like randomness in general, and I'm very confused by that, but whatever, let's just keep going.
I think we need to talk about why randomness is used in game design at all. For starters, randomness is used to provide variety. Well-made algorithms can pump out practically infinite setups, levels, characters, and problems. Sure, a procedurally generated level is almost never as good as a completely handcrafted one, but the clear advantage is diversity and quantity. Some games generate content once and then distribute that to all players.
This is also something that's kind of interesting to compare to board games, because board games can't really do procedurally generated content. I kind of seen it, but it's never in the ways it's done in video games, at least like the levels of success, I'd say. Maybe like in Gloomhaven, sure, like you make some random dungeons with the random dungeon deck. That's pretty cool. The way I see it in board games is that most of the time randomness just arrives in the form of like the board state, as in like, oh, like the setup is going to be slightly different, or people have different hands of cards. It's never something insane, like completely different layouts, different maps, different mechanics, stuff like that. I mean, I guess that's one of the disadvantages of analog versus digital, because digital you can have a million things processing all at once, and the game can load in all this stuff at the blink of an eye. So
other games generate new content every time you play, which is how games in the roguelike genre work. That can be beneficial because by removing the ability to endlessly replay the same level and memorize every aspect of the stage, players are forced to master the underlying mechanics of the game itself, so they're ready for absolutely anything the algorithm might throw at them.
And see, that's one of my favorite things about randomness as a tool, is that, in my opinion, it absolutely tests true mastery of a game and not just memorizing what exactly to do at every exact moment. I think when randomness is used as a way to like shake things up, but not totally just like harm your thought processes and the way you interact with the game, it allows you to like set up very, very dynamic game states that are constantly engaging and interactive, because now the players have to look at something and say, ooh, how am I going to adapt to that? And the person who does that the best will often still be the winner. Like when I say the statement, the better players shouldn't always win, I'm not saying that like, oh, the person who's clearly better than the game everyone else should like never win. No, it's more just like they probably should win like 80, 90% of the time instead of 100% of the time. Like, that's totally healthy variance to me.
Randomness is also a way to balance a multiplayer game. Basically, lucky rolls and unlucky draws can limit the importance of pure skill and give newer players a chance to get ahead. That's especially true when the randomness is weighted in favor of new players, such as in Mario Kart, where the random item boxes are way more generous to the players at the back of the pack than those in first place.
See, that's something I also very much enjoy about randomness, is that it gives the new guy a chance. Like, come on. I know that this might be heresy that's like, oh, the new player winning over a game of a bunch of tryhards, like, that shouldn't ever happen. I'm saying that should be a possibility, but it shouldn't, like, be impossible. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not saying the new player should be able to just, like, walk away with a very stupid victory that kind of just, they just pull it out of their ass. I'm saying more like the tools and the pieces should be there so that the new player, like, can see the light at the end of the tunnel at least, you know? If RNG is so bad that it's giving advantage to people by swinging the game set around like a pendulum, like, that's probably not the right place for it to be. But it should be in a place that lets the pendulum kind of like sway, not so much swing.
This is usually only desirable when it's expected that players of vastly different skill levels will be playing together. Otherwise, the randomness can obscure who is actually the most skilled combatant. So that's why it appears more often in party games and board games for families, and not esport level stuff. Randomness can also be used to make rewards in games more exciting. Grabbing an awesome new weapon from a dead body in a...
See, the thing about randomness in competitive games, though, is that it should pretty much, like, always mostly be input randomness, and the level of variance, meaning like the range of outcomes that are there by the randomness, should never be that big. I still think that that is an excellent playground, excellent sandbox for there to still be a very high expression of skill without necessarily taking out the fun that exists in having to adapt to dynamic game states caused by randomness.
A looter shooter like Borderlands is way more exciting when you know there was only a small chance for that gun to drop. This can, of course, be taken to the extreme, creating a Skinner box trick that's designed to sap your time, or, more perniciously, your wallet.
Oh my god. Okay, video games having a problem with loot boxes and gambling, all that. Whew. Okay, I'm pretty glad board games does not have that. Maybe it's going to get there at some point. Like, maybe developers are going to, you know, mosey up and figure out, wait, microtransactions is a very good way to make a buttload of money. But industry's not quite there yet. I hope they never get there, Jesus Christ. Can you imagine board games that had just like RNG loot drops, totally random things that would happen that would determine like your loadout and, you know, stats and equipment and whatever? And that'd be something else. Maybe the medium just isn't very friendly towards that though, because there's not a lot of hand-holding automation going on in the rules in the background. You know, video games can kind of just do a bunch of things for you. So who knows what will happen in the future when it comes to this type of stuff.
And finally, randomness can play a role in the player's formation of plans. Making plans requires information, which is essentially the current state of the game's variables, like the enemy's location, health, and perhaps even their intention for what they'll do next turn.
Oh my, I love the way Mark is explaining this. Like, he has the perfect goddamn visuals. He is showing you exactly what it means by just, hey, here's a game state, right? You can clearly tell there's a bunch of information here. You're probably supposed to be strategizing around this. And now he's probably going to transition this into point about, hey, randomness lets the game state be more dynamic. Exactly what the hell I was saying earlier.
The more information we have, the better our plans can be. But too much information can actually be quite troublesome. For one, complete transparency can lead to players being able to calculate many possible moves into the future to figure out the optimum choice, a paralysis of analysis which can be super tedious, but you already know how players can optimize the fun out of a game.
Does this guy play board games? Oh my god. I don't know, maybe paralysis analysis and analysis paralysis, AP. I don't know. That term, I've only ever really heard it in like board games. So hearing it here is a little weird for me. I mean, he did say it a little backwards, right? Paralysis analysis paralysis. Having too much information, having complete transparency of everything really sucks out the fun to me in terms of just like replayability, adaptability. Like a lot of decisions will just become min-maxed. And I do not want to play games where I am memorizing things and regurgitating it.
You can spend 10-20 minutes just staring at a static screen, figuring out the ramifications of every choice you might make. Plus, we can create airtight plans which rarely fail. This can create flat and uneventful gameplay, as it's often much better when plans get disrupted with surprising new information, forcing us to react, regroup, and replan.
There's another thing I want to point out about that, and I remember reading somewhere on r/boardgames, somewhere on Reddit, that's precisely what is not fun, having your plans disrupted. Like, I get that there is this sense of like, oh my god, I'm so big brain, I'm calculating so many things, and it's very satisfying to see this insane plan you put together all like come to fruition. But I feel like the novelty of that wears off really fast. Like, for me at least, when it comes to playing games that lets you plan out that far ahead, it's pretty cool to do it like once. And then like afterwards, it doesn't really matter what game it is, it's gonna be the exact same thing every single time. You just memorize / absorb information of everything that's going on and just make the perfect play. Like, it's not really gonna be different. It's just gonna be you executing, like, not necessarily like the same plan, but the methodology is still there. You just have all the information. The game's telling you, like, you know, hey, here's what's happening, and then here's how I'm gonna perfectly plan around that. Like, sure, okay.
So we generally want to cap the amount of information the player has access to. The game designer Keith Begun calls this the information horizon, defined as the distance between the current turn and the point at which information becomes known to a player.
Information horizon is a very good term. I feel like if I didn't have that, like, piece of vernacular in my knowledge, I would just be saying stuff like, I don't know, it's like fog of war.
So, randomness certainly has a role in game design, but to really get to grips with it, we need to break it down into two types, which game designers frequently refer to as input randomness and output randomness.
You know, that is very cool that Mark brings this up, because I only learned about these terms, believe it or not, from Stonemaier Games. Yeah, I was reading the Wingspan dev diaries for our Wingspan review, really going in depth about, like, you know, how Wingspan came to be. And I distinctly remember there was I don't even remember which log it was, but yeah, the designer talked about input randomness and how she really wanted to have that be a key factor of, like, you know, the cards, the birds that are coming out in Wingspan.
Input randomness is when a random event occurs before the player gets to make a decision. The most obvious take on this is the procedurally generated levels in a roguelike, because they're cobbled together and then you get to play in them.
You know, I should also probably establish some video game terms here, because I kind of just forgot that, you know, this is a board game channel. So for the uninitiated here, a roguelike game is a game where pretty much everything about the game is procedurally generated, and you do like a run through of the game. So it's not like a game where it's like a set story and a set like event like timing and like stuff's just going on scripted as planned. It's more like you build like your own character and you're thrust into like a procedurally generated dungeon, and you kind of just see how far you can go. The reason why they're called roguelikes is because there was a game literally just called Rogue. Maybe it was Rogue something, I don't remember. I had Rogue in the name, and I was basically gonna kind of pioneer it. It was like a platformer game where he plays like a dude with like different stats, like different, you know, character traits, whatever. And he just ran through dungeons with random layouts, random enemies, random encounters. It was very cool. And Now there's a bunch of games out like that, so.
Other examples are drawing a hand of cards before taking your turn in a deck builder, or rolling dice and then choosing where to spend them in dicey dungeons. Output randomness, though, is when you make a decision and then luck takes over and the game tells you what happened. The most infamous example of this is hit chances in XCOM, where you tell your soldier to shoot an alien, but it's down to chance whether your bullets will actually hit their target. Other examples are not knowing what the enemy will do until after you press end turn, or I guess paying for a loot box and only afterwards being told what was in it.
See, it's a good thing that there's this distinction between input and output randomness, because I do feel like there definitely are a lot of people who conflate the two, and it's part of a big reason why there's so much, I guess, flack towards randomness as a tool in game design. Like, not all randomness is the same, and I'm pretty sure most people are 100% okay with input randomness so long as there's like not that much variability in it, right? There's still like a good amount of choice and skill to be made in your decisions. Output randomness is something that should probably be more rarely used, but if done well, can still provide very interesting opportunities, which I'm sure Mark will get into later.
Output randomness is certainly more responsible for anger and resentment than input randomness. Output can take away control and break your plans, not out of strategic incompetence, but sheer bad luck. And most of the random stuff we like the least in games can be labelled as output randomness, such as random encounters and loot boxes.
I mean, yeah, you said it. A lot of people don't like output randomness. And that's also probably why a lot of people don't like dice rolling in general, because that's pretty much your most extreme form of output randomness right there.
But I don't think it's just a case of input randomness equals good, output randomness equals bad.
I mean, that's what I was going to say, but apparently not. I don't know. I'm usually of the opinion that input randomness are pretty good, output randomness bad, so let's see what he has to say about that.
They're both tools that must be used wisely, and poorly designed input randomness can wreck a game, just like carefully tuned output randomness can, sometimes, improve it. With input randomness, these unpredictable starting conditions can sometimes massively dictate the likelihood of success. In Slay the Spire, the devs didn't want you to just hit restart until you got some really powerful cards or a relic at the beginning of your run.
So when he's talking about runs, like, you know, your roguelike games out there, like, that definitely is a thing that you can just do, because, like, if you just keep restarting the run over and over again to make sure your character starts with really good stuff, like, that's not really in the spirit of what was intended. To kind of want you just, like, you know, be dealt your hand of cards and see how it gets played, right?
So, they introduced a system where you start the game with additional bonuses, but only if you made it to the first boss on your previous go. This encourages players to at least try to play with the stuff they're given, and who knows, maybe they'll still find a strategy that can see them be victorious. Another way is to control the randomness in some fashion to reduce the chaos that it can bring. When setting up the tabletop game Pandemic, you start...
Wait a minute, what the I did not expect to see Pandemic in here, for sure. Wow, okay, yeah, you know what? Mark Brown knows what he's talking about. Plays board games and video games.
by removing all of the epidemic cards from the play deck. These cards are terrifying, game-changing events that can completely demolish your team. You then split the remaining cards into 4 piles and shuffle 1 epidemic card into each. Finally, you stack the 4 piles together to create a finished deck. It's a bit of a faff, but it's a clever way of ensuring that you always have a pretty fair game where epidemic events happen evenly throughout the adventure. It's impossible to have, say, 3 epidemics at the very start, or no epidemics until long after you've cured all the diseases. But there's still a chance of getting 2 epidemics in a row, or having an epidemic on the very first turn, though neither of these would break the game, and the odds are slim enough for those to be exciting, surprising, one-off events. I've never said the word epidemic so many times. And actually, lots of games put limits on their randomness. Diablo 3 has a smart loot system, where you're more likely to find items that match the character class you're playing, to reduce the likelihood of finding pointless hats and swords. And in modern versions of Tetris, the game doesn't just pick a block at random for every drop. Instead, the game generates a random sequence of all 7 blocks and then delivers them in that order before making a new sequence.
This is something that I see happen in video games a lot, is this kind of curated randomness. Like, there's a lot of games out there that people do not expect to have, like, this behind-the-scenes thing going on with, like, oh, like, our randomness isn't actually truly that random, It's just that it has the sense of being there without actually fully letting the range be controlled by randomness. Video games actually do this a lot, not just for randomness, but just having things like tweaked behind the scenes a little bit to make you as the player feel good without you ever actually realizing that it's being done. Things like dynamic difficulty adjustment, scaling like the loot or levels of things behind the scenes that, the experience flows smoother depending on how well you're actually playing the game. Board games can't really do stuff like that. That would be very, very obtrusive. You would have to like constantly be updating and checking the rulebook to see like how the game would be changing on the fly as you play it. So I'm not even gonna get into that.
Another thing to consider is how often are new input randomness events occurring. If these occur at the start of every single turn, it can have the effect of drawing the information horizon in claustrophobically close and stopping you from making plans that last any time at all. Designers should ideally consider their game's information flow, a term invented by Ethan Hopener in the article Plan Disruption. He points to XCOM, where we can make strategic plans about how we want to approach each mission, and for a good few turns, our plan will be pretty viable. Not perfect, thanks to all the output randomness, but close enough.
I didn't actually consider that. This is an example of input randomness not used well when you use it too much. If you're constantly having to adjust your plan all the time, that's probably very annoying, slows the game down, makes you not want to deal with other randomness. Like, sure, you have options and choices to deal with stuff, but you can't form plans and have a general game flow going on.
But every now and again, you'll stumble onto a new pod of enemies, or a fresh batch of foes will descend onto the battlefield. This unexpected spike in new information disrupts your plan and forces you to stop, regroup, and rethink. He says a good pattern to follow is the spiky information flow, in which high-impact information is collected into discrete spikes that happen at regular intervals, with a slow, regular flow of information between the spikes.
Heavily agree with this. That is probably one of the most exciting feelings you can get for when your plan's going on well, you're doing the thing, and then something comes that doesn't quite completely screw everything over, but it does definitely change up what's going on, and up to the point where it's just like, oh, I definitely gotta, rethink with what I currently have. It's like never a feeling of complete hopelessness, but more just like an exciting little flavor that you throw into the stew to mix things up a bit. And again, this also ties back into why I don't think randomness should ever have insane degrees of variance, but it should be tied to things that alter your gameplay, but not to the point where like things are flipped on their head,
As for output randomness, you might wonder why developers would want to use it at all. Well, for starters, this sort of randomness can be a good way of simulating mistakes and inaccuracies in a game with an abstract combat system, which is games where you tell characters to perform an action rather than doing the action yourself. If your units never missed, then that wouldn't be particularly realistic. Also, output randomness forces players to think about risk management and to create contingency plans if things go wrong, which I think are totally valid skills to test.
That's definitely very true, but I do think that the output randomness should have like a safety block to it, right? Because if you are attacking with like a 70% success rate on like 4 different attacks and they all fail, which is like totally thing that can happen, and in your human brain you're probably thinking, well, like 3 of them probably should have hit, right? So I actually know this happens a lot in a bunch of RPGs, tactical RPGs like this, where they will actually mask the actual percentages of attacks in the game. Like, for example, even though a percentage for like your hit rate might be like 90%, the game will just make it like 99% anyways, because like this is just like how your human brain works, right? Like if you ever miss an attack that has a 90% chance to hit, you're gonna be like, oh, come on, that was completely bull, man. Come on, no. There's a lot of this type of like fudging in games. And if you're not familiar with D&D, right, like fudging is a term that is the dungeon master rolling the dice, not liking the result and kind of just changing it up, but he doesn't tell the players that he did this because, they roll the dice behind the screen.
There's this idea that output randomness essentially becomes input randomness for the next turn, because you'll be dealing with the consequences of whatever just happened. There are also methods to make output randomness feel more fun. One way is to get away from binary hit or miss mechanics. In Phoenix Point, which comes from original XCOM designer Julian Gollop, each bullet fired is simulated through a ballistic system, so you might find that some of your bullets hit and some of them miss, which is way less annoying than XCOM's punitive complete miss.
This is, again, me going, hey, look at that. Too much flip-floppity in your range of variance, pretty bad. I like that system a lot though, like you shooting a bunch of bullets and then the hit percentages apply to all of them, so that you're probably gonna hit like most of them and some of them miss. I don't know, maybe at the same time that would make the game a little too stale in the attacking, because every attack is, on average, gonna be pretty similar to the next one, assuming that the percentage stays the same. Because again, the more times that you roll a percentage, the closer and closer you're gonna get to that statistical average, so.
It can also be important to show the player the odds, because this allows them to make way more informed decisions about which risks they're willing to take, or how their actions, like moving closer to the enemy, can impact their chances of success. Unfortunately though, humans are just really bad at understanding odds. That's thanks to countless cognitive biases in our pattern-seeking brains that make it really hard to deal with random numbers.
I don't know how I'm so on point with just like calling these things. I mean, this is exactly what I was talking about, but I mean, yeah.
In fact, game developers frequently lie about the actual chances of things happening, so the probability in games better matches the broken probability in our heads. The numbers in most Fire Emblem games are subtly massaged in the player's favour, so, for example, a 90% chance to hit is actually more like a 99% chance. If you lose 2 33% chance battles in Civilization, the third will always succeed because that's how we think numbers work. Other games use cards, another familiar, real-world.
You know, it's getting really interesting to me how many games that Mark is talking about here that I'm not really the most familiar with, that also kind of seem to just be like, this just almost looks like digital tabletop. It's very interesting to me.
Cards are interesting because where dice feature independent probability, i.e. each throw of the die has 0 impact on the next one, cards can have dependent probability, i.e. by drawing a card and removing it from the deck, you've now changed the makeup of the deck and impacted the probability of the next draw. It can also be good to have output randomness in places that will only ever be in the player's favour. The only real example of output randomness in Into the Breach is the game's building defense system, where there's a very small chance that the enemy's attack will actually miss and save you from surefire defeat.
See, that's something I very much enjoy. There is nothing quite as hype as when an enemy attacks you and they flat out miss, dealing no damage. Love that feeling.
So, randomness can be an incredibly important part of games. It's used for variety, balance, rewards, the information horizon, and probably more things I've forgotten about.
I don't quite know about balance. I think it's more of like a thing you have to turn randomness into something balanced. It's more like it offers so much breadth of life, flavor, just variety. That's the big deal to me, all right? Like, it's kind of up to the designer to figure out how you balance randomness to, you know, make it actually effective and not so much of a thing that just pisses off your players.
But because it can impact everything from fairness to player psychology, it's something that designers must use with great care and attention. Understanding the difference between input and output randomness is perhaps the most important thing to learn, but it's also crucial to realize that neither of these is a silver bullet or a dastardly trap. Both can endanger or improve a game's design depending on how they are used. But when used correctly, randomness can do amazing things. It can create surprises and unique situations. It can force the constant re-evaluation of strategies, and it can turn players into risk-calculating tacticians.
Very, very well said. I could not have said it better myself. And to further elaborate on my thing about, you know, just enjoying changing up my strategies, like, I think maybe what I just realized, I had like an epiphany while I'm recording this, that there's a difference in the type of enjoyment people are getting from making a plan versus actually executing the plan. And I'm definitely more of a I love making plans kind of guy.
Thanks so much for watching. I've put some links in the description.
Oh, wait, video's done. Oh, nice. Okay. Well, that is very, very well said, very informative. A lot of stuff that was in it, I definitely feel like I just somehow already knew. At least conceptually, maybe not perhaps the name of things, but just, yeah, conceptually. But I would definitely recommend a lot of people to go and check out the video in its entirety. Very informative, very big brain, explains the points on randomness very, very well across all sides of the board here. I cannot stress enough how much randomness is a tool to be used in design, just like anything else you would put into a game. It can make or break it, but when it makes it, it makes the game that much more better. And the best games out there are the ones that utilize every single tool they have in their arsenal to produce something amazing in its totality. Because anytime there's some key aspect that is missing in a game, which tends to be randomness, I guess, that's what kind of just tends to turn me off, right? Like, I like my games to have a wide breadth of variety and possibility inside them, because that's just what keeps me engaged. It's what lets me come back to it again and again and again. That's why there's so many games out there that I probably play like 10 times, and I'm like, I've seen all there is to see to this game. I haven't quite mastered it, but I've gotten to the point where it's like I'm very good at it, and it's just there's nothing left for me to do there. And not only is there nothing left for me to do there, it's static, it's unchanging, and so it's boring to come back to. I can't call it a bad game. In fact, it's a pretty good game. Everything kind of still functions. It works pretty well, but nothing's changing, and I get bored. But anyways, yeah, just thought it'd be interesting to make this video, have a different perspective, a different look on randomness as a tool in games. Hopefully you guys all learned something with me, hopefully learned a bit of my thought process, and hopefully I've changed some people's minds out there that randomness is something that is generally pretty good, just has to be used right, kind of like all tools out there in the world. But anyways, that's gonna be it for this Shelfside video. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, check out all of our social media, and we will see you in the next episode. No, we will see you in the next video. Goodbye.